Have you ever wondered why the quiet ones always seem to hold the most power? It doesn't start with a war, a speech, or a grand entrance. It begins in the shadows with a man who chooses silence over noise. While others shout their intentions, he watches. While they explain their plans, he listens. And while they seek validation, he sharpens his strategy in the dark. He knows what they don't. Every word spoken is a gift to the enemy, a clue, a signal, a warning. As time passes, those who talk become predictable. Their ambitions leak through every sentence. Their weaknesses are exposed in every attempt to be understood, but the quiet man says nothing. Not because he has nothing to say, but because he knows power is lost the moment it's explained. He studies them, watches them, stumble over their own need to be seen, to be heard. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't correct. He simply waits. And when the time is right, when their guards are down and their assumptions are high, he strikes quietly, precisely, without warning. History doesn't remember the loudest voice in the room. It remembers the one no one saw coming, the one who didn't need to announce his plans because he was too busy executing them. In a world obsessed with attention, silence is the last form of power. No one knows how to defend against. So ask yourself, are you making noise or making moves? They didn't ask for applause. They didn't wait for permission. The greatest leaders in history weren't the ones who spoke the most. They were the ones who acted while everyone else was still talking. Take Julius Caesar. He didn't hold press conferences. He didn't explain to the Roman Senate what he was about to do. While they debated politics and clung to the illusion of control, Caesar prepared in silence. And then one morning, without warning, he crossed the Rubicon. In that moment, there was no more discussion. The time for words was over. The act itself changed history. His enemies were still trying to predict his next move. Still arguing, still sleeping. And by the time they realized what had happened, it was already too late. That is the mark of a true strategist. Not someone who announces power, but someone who takes it quietly, decisively. Centuries later, Napoleon Bonaparte would follow the same path. He didn't waste energy justifying his campaigns. He acted with speed, confusion, and absolute resolve. While his enemies wrote letters and held council meetings, he was already on the battlefield. He didn't need to explain himself. His victories were the explanation. There's a lesson buried here deeper than most realize. The world listens to results, not promises. Every time you pause to explain your intentions, you delay your momentum. Every moment you spend trying to convince others is a moment lost to those who are already moving. You don't need a speech to make history. You need action. The men and women who bend the world to their will aren't the loudest. They're the most disciplined. They act when the world isn't looking. They move when no one is ready. And when the dust settles, only one truth remains. The quietest move often changes everything. So if you're still trying to be understood, stop. If you're still explaining why you deserve success, stop. Because while you're talking, someone else is already doing. You've been told that sharing is strength, that opening up builds trust, that expressing your goals makes them real. But here's the truth. They don't teach you every time you speak. You hand over a piece of your power. Think back. How many times have you shared your dreams only to be met with doubt, envy, or subtle sabotage? How many times did someone smile to your face while quietly stealing your idea, your momentum, your edge? Sharing makes you human, but in a world of predators, humanity is weakness. When people know what drives you, they can block it. When they know what scares you, they can use it. The more they understand your mind, the easier it becomes to trap you in it. You think you're being honest. You think you're connecting. But what you're really doing is arming your enemies, giving them the blueprint to undermine you, because people rarely use your secrets to protect you. Most use them to gain leverage. Machiavelli warned rulers never to reveal more than necessary, because the moment your thoughts become public, they become vulnerable. The more transparent you are, the more predictable you become. And in the game of power, predictability is suicide. You don't owe your story to everyone. You don't need to explain your next move. Let them wonder. Let them assume. Let them guess wrong, because every question they ask that you don't answer only deepens their confusion and your control. Protect your inner world like a fortress. Build walls around your vision. Speak only when it serves your purpose, because once the wrong person knows your path, they don't need to walk it with you. They just need to block it. The more silent you become, the more dangerous you are, not because you're hiding, but because they have nothing to strike. Power doesn't require truth, it requires perception, and perception isn't built by what you say. It's built by what you withhold. The illusion of power has always been stronger than the display of it. In a world where everyone is oversharing, overspeaking, and constantly performing, the person who stays silent becomes magnetic, mysterious, dangerous. People don't fear what they understand, they fear what they can't define. When you speak too much, people categorize you, they dissect your thoughts. They analyze your behavior, and the moment you're understood, you're no longer feared, you're managed. But the one who speaks little, who moves in silence, they become a question mark, and in power, the question mark is always deadlier than the period. Look at history's most formidable figures. They weren't loud. They weren't desperate to be known. They allowed others to build myths around them, because those myths crafted from silence were more powerful than any truth they could have shared. The silence made them unpredictable, unreadable, and in that unreadability, they gained control. When people can't define you, they hesitate, they start to guess. They start to fear that you know something they don't, that you're capable of something they can't predict. That fear is leverage. You don't need to scream to be respected. You don't need to declare your power to be powerful. Let people wonder what you're thinking. Let them create their own version of you in their minds, because the version they imagine will always be more intimidating than the one you explain. Control the perception. Say little, move with precision. Let silence be your publicist and mystery your armor. Because in the end, power doesn't belong to those who speak the most. It belongs to those who make others speak about them. While saying nothing at all, there is something haunting about a man who doesn't speak. A woman who watches but says nothing. A presence that lingers without explanation, that is mystery. And mystery is more than intrigue. It is a weapon, because people do not fear what they see clearly. They fear the shadow, the unknown. The silence that hides intent. When they don't know your plan, they can't prepare. When they don't know your fear, they can't exploit it. When they can't predict your next move, they become paralyzed by possibilities. And that paralysis is your advantage. Mystery makes people overthink. It forces them to project their own anxieties onto you. They begin to question your motives, second guess your silence, and imagine dangers that don't even exist. Their fear becomes a self-inflicted prison, built entirely from assumptions. This is the power of being unreadable. It isn't about disappearing. It's about forcing others to see ghosts where there are none. Machiavelli understood this. He taught rulers not only to deceive, but to leave just enough trace, just enough ambiguity that their enemies would fill in the gaps with dread. Fear isn't strongest when it's seen. It's strongest when it's imagined. You don't need to fight every battle. Sometimes mystery alone is enough to keep enemies at bay. Let them stay up at night, wondering what you're planning. Let them fear a storm that never comes, because fear, when left unconfirmed, grows. Your silence isn't emptiness, it's a mirror. And when people stare into it long enough, they don't see you. They see themselves, their weaknesses, their doubts, their shadows. And in that moment of hesitation, while they second guess, while they prepare for 10 possible attacks, you strike with one. The one they never saw coming. Predictability is comfort, but comfort is the enemy of power. The moment your next move can be anticipated, you lose the one thing that makes you dangerous: uncertainty. In the game of power, to be predictable is to be vulnerable, because what can be expected can be blocked. What can be understood can be neutralized. How many times have you revealed your goals only to watch someone beat you to them? How often have your routines become maps for others to follow or to sabotage? This is the trap most people fall into. They want to be known, to be seen, to be understood. But in seeking recognition, they become readable. And in becoming readable, they become controllable. The most powerful figures in history weren't successful because they were stronger or louder. They were successful because no one could ever quite figure them out. They didn't move in straight lines. They zigzagged, disappeared, reappeared. They broke their own patterns, rewrote their roles, and shattered expectations. Because the mind of a strategist understands this simple truth: if the enemy can predict your next move, the battle is already lost. But if they don't know what's coming, if they doubt what you'll do next, if they waste time guessing instead of preparing, then you've already won before the fight begins. Power favors the shapeshifter, the one who reinvents, who disrupts their own rhythm, who never lets the world get too comfortable with who they are. You don't owe anyone consistency, only results. Let others become patterns, let them become habits. You, on the other hand, must become a disruption, a glitch in the system, a question mark that never turns into a period. Because when they think they've figured you out, that's the moment you must become someone else entirely. There's a moment right after you choose not to respond, when the air thickens. Silence falls, and suddenly the other person begins to shift. They fidget. They repeat themselves. Their voice rises just a little. Why? Because silence isn't absence, it's pressure. It's the invisible weight that forces others to fill the void with their own fears. In a world addicted to noise, silence is confrontation. Most people don't realize how fragile they are until they're met with no reaction. When you remain calm, still unreadable, it doesn't relax them. It rattles them. Because your silence forces them to confront their own thoughts, their own uncertainty, and people fear uncertainty more than anything. Negotiators know this well. The one who speaks first loses leverage. The moment you reveal your position, you give your opponent a map of your mind. But the one who remains quiet gains ground with every second. Silence makes others over-explain, overcommit, and reveal far more than they intended. In relationships, silence becomes a mirror. Say nothing when insulted and watch the offender crumble, questioning whether they've gone too far. Refuse to respond to provocation, and they begin to second-guess their assumptions. That's the power of strategic silence. It turns the other person's confidence into confusion. Machiavelli understood this psychological warfare. He knew that the most effective leaders don't just withhold information, they use the absence of words to make others speak more than they should. Because silence isn't passive, it's active. It shapes the room without saying a word. So the next time someone demands your reaction, give them nothing. Let them sweat in the silence. Let them talk themselves into a corner. And when the moment is right, when they've shown you who they are and what they fear, speak once, clearly, and win completely. Silence alone is not enough. If you vanish completely, people begin to notice your absence. They grow suspicious, they dig. And that too can become dangerous. The art is not just in hiding, it's in misdirecting, in giving just enough to satisfy curiosity while leading it in the wrong direction. This isn't retreat, it's redirection. And it's one of the most effective tools in psychological warfare. Powerful people don't just go dark. They go deceptive. They plant ideas, scatter signals, drop half-truths designed to send others chasing shadows. While their enemies prepare for one strike, the real move is happening elsewhere. That is the genius of misdirection. It doesn't just conceal, it confuses. It exhausts your opponent's mental energy before the real battle even begins. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He advised rulers not only to be secretive, but to control the narrative, to let people think they know what's happening. Because once someone thinks they understand you, they stop questioning. They let their guard down, and that's when control becomes absolute. You don't need to lie. You just need to be selective with the truth. Say just enough to suggest one story while concealing the real one underneath. Let them assume you're struggling when you're building. Let them believe you're weak when you're preparing to strike. Feed their overconfidence like poison in a glass of wine. This is how illusion becomes power, because the enemy you confuse is the enemy who hesitates, and in hesitation you gain time, you gain space, you gain freedom to move undetected. Every master strategist knows this. The mind is easier to manipulate than the battlefield. You don't need to destroy your opponents. You just need them to destroy their focus, to question themselves, to make decisions based on false information while you stay one step ahead. So don't just disappear. Leave footprints in the wrong direction. Don't just stay quiet. Let your silence speak lies louder than words. Confuse them, distract them. While they chase the ghost, you walk away with the crown. Because real control isn't about being seen, it's about being misseen on purpose. The most powerful person in the room is often not the one speaking, not the one in the spotlight, not the one everyone applauds. The true architect of control is rarely seen, rarely named, because real influence thrives in the shadows. Look closely at history's greatest empires and you'll find that the face of power was rarely the source of it. Kings wore crowns, but someone else moved the pieces. Presidents gave speeches, but someone behind the curtain decided what words would be said. The figurehead may shine under the lights, but the strategist stays in the dark, where they cannot be attacked, cannot be blamed, and cannot be removed. Cardinal Richelieu never sat on the throne of France. He never wore a crown. Yet every law passed through his hands, every decision bore his fingerprints. He ruled not by force, but by positioning himself behind the man who held the scepter. And because no one could directly oppose him, his control was total. This is the highest level of power. Not to be praised, not to be feared, but to be unknown. To move people, policies, and outcomes, while the world never sees your hand, to be invisible. And in that invisibility, to be untouchable. Modern life is no different. Corporations are run by CEOs, whose names you may know, but whose decisions are shaped by quiet boards. Shadow financiers, silent strategists. The person you see is the illusion. The one who controls them is the truth. And that truth is cold but freeing. You don't need recognition to dominate. You don't need applause to shape outcomes. In fact, the more visible you are, the more vulnerable you become. Targets are painted on those who shine, but no one aims at what they can't see. Influence from the shadows is not weakness, it's precision. It's choosing when to appear and when to disappear. It's understanding that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that speaks through others. So resist the urge to be seen. Let others claim the credit, the praise, the exposure. Let them become the symbol while you become the system. Because True power doesn't sit on the throne. It builds it and chooses who gets to wear the crown. Words are cheap. Promises are weaker than silence. And in the real game of power, the one who acts first and speaks last wins. The world is full of people who talk about what they're going to do. They announce their goals, they share their dreams, they describe their future like it's already here. But while they talk, the strategist is already moving, already executing, already shifting the board, while others are still explaining the rules. To act first is to seize control of time itself. It is to leave your rivals unprepared, their guard down, their attention misdirected. And by the time they realize what's happening, it's already too late. This is not just about speed. It's about surprise. It's about striking before permission is asked, before approval is granted, before applause is even possible. Great leaders never begged the world to understand them. They made the world understand through results. Julius Caesar didn't deliver a speech before crossing the Rubicon. He crossed it. Napoleon didn't write a letter explaining his next campaign. He launched it. They didn't ask for the stage. They took the stage, and only after victory did the world listen. Machiavelli knew that if you speak before you move, you invite resistance. You give your enemies time to build walls, prepare counterattacks, and poison your path. But when you act in silence, without announcement, without expectation, you leave them disoriented. And in that confusion, you claim dominance. So, act. Let your success speak louder than any explanation ever could. Let others be shocked by what you've already done while they were still thinking about what they might do. Because the most powerful sentence you'll ever say is, "It's already done." You owe no one for warning. You owe no one. Your blueprint. The strongest move is the one that is made before it is seen. The strongest voice is the one that speaks only after the outcome is inevitable. Speak last. So that when you do, the world has no choice but to listen. There's a level of power so refined, so absolute, that it no longer needs recognition. It doesn't boast, doesn't explain, and doesn't announce itself. It moves in silence. It strikes without warning. And when it wins, no one even knows who pulled the strings. That is the ghost strategy mastery without visibility. While most people seek validation, fighting for attention, chasing titles, trying to be seen, the ghost moves behind the curtain. They don't care who gets the credit. They care who controls the outcome. Their power isn't in their name being known. It's in their name being untouchable. The ghost never follows a pattern. While others become predictable, the ghost adapts, disappears, transforms. One day they seem weak. The next day they vanish completely. Then suddenly their presence is felt, not through words, not through titles, but through consequences. This is how the most dangerous figures in history moved. They didn't sit on the throne, they decided who would sit there. They didn't give orders in public, they whispered in private, and the world moved. Because when no one sees you coming, no one can stop you in war. In business and life, the visible target is always the most vulnerable. The ghost avoids the spotlight. They let others take the fall, absorb the blame, and distract the public eye. Meanwhile, the ghost rewrites the script from behind the scenes. To live like this is to break free from ego, to choose influence over attention, to trade applause for power. You don't need to be loud to be effective. You don't need to be known to be in control. In fact, the less people see you, the more they fear what you might do. Let them underestimate you. Let them forget your name. And when they finally realize who was behind the shift, it will be too late to stop it, because real power doesn't knock on the door. It slips through the cracks. It rewires the locks. And by the time the door opens, the ghost is already inside. Silence isn't passive. It isn't empty. It's the most underestimated weapon in the psychological arsenal, and it cuts deeper than any insult, sharper than any threat. Because silence doesn't just withhold information, it creates tension, suspicion, and fear. When you say nothing, people begin to fill in the gaps. They project. They assume, and most dangerously of all, they begin to overthink. A single unanswered message, an ignored insult, a cold stare. These can unravel a person far faster than confrontation ever could. Why? Because silence leaves room for imagination, and imagination fueled by insecurity is a ruthless tormentor. People don't fear what you say. They fear what you might be thinking. The moment you stop explaining yourself, you shift the psychological balance. They start to wonder, did I say something wrong? Are they angry? Are they planning something? That uncertainty becomes their prison. Machiavelli understood this. He knew that the most powerful rulers weren't the ones who shouted. They were the ones who sat quietly listening, letting others squirm under the weight of their own speculation. Because silence doesn't just delay reaction, it forces the other side to collapse inward. It makes them question their strength, their position, even their sanity in relationships. Silence can shake a foundation. In negotiations, it can win the deal before the terms are even spoken. In power struggles, it can isolate and weaken opponents without ever lifting a finger. And the most fascinating part It's invisible. No one can accuse you of silence. No one can attack a word you never spoke. Most people fear being misunderstood. But those who hold true power fear only being predictable. When you speak, you reveal your mind. But when you stay quiet, you become unreadable, and what's unreadable becomes untouchable. Let others talk. Let them explain. Justify. Beg for understanding. You say nothing. Watch everything. Let your silence do the heavy lifting. Because in the end, the most terrifying enemy is the one who doesn't speak in a world that never stops talking. Silence is power. The core lesson of Machiavellian strategy isn't just to hide, it's to become unpredictable. When you stay silent, you force others to react. They begin to guess, overthink, and expose their own weaknesses, all while you remain in control. In everyday life, you don't have to explain every decision. You don't need to announce your goals or seek approval before making moves. Silence protects your vision. It keeps you from being manipulated, misread, or sabotaged. Act first. Speak last. Observe more. Reveal less. Keep people off balance. Let them wonder what you're planning, because the moment they think they've figured you out, they've already lost the advantage. This isn't about being passive. It's about being precise. Power isn't in loud declarations. It's in quiet execution. The world often rewards those who say the least and move the smartest. In silence, you are underestimated. And that's exactly where your strength begins.